Thank you for joining us for this week's edition of Southwest Connections, our new campus-based show that brings you the stories behind the many great people that make Southwest the place it is. I'm Bill Malso, and I'm the host of the show. So let's hear a little bit more about what's happening on campus. My guest this week is Spencer Louwagie. Welcome, Spencer.
Hi, nice to be here.
Spencer's our new head coach of the SMSU esports team, and so we're going to learn a little bit about esports today. But that's not the only thing you do on campus. So tell us a little bit about your full-time job here at SMSU before we learn about esports.
Yeah, so I work for IT here. I started about 3.5 years ago now. Maybe it's getting close to 4. You lose track of time when you're working IT, I feel like. You end up so busy you don't even think about what day of the week it is or what month it is. But you know, been working for SMSU for about 4 years, and then I got approached to help create this program for esports. So I was going with trying to help them figure out what they would all need, and then I didn't realize I was simultaneously interviewing for the esports head coach job. So that was a pretty interesting surprise when I got offered it. But I love esports, so there was no question in my mind of what to say.
So esports has kind of taken campuses, by wildfire for the last couple of years. For those of us that don't know, tell us a little bit about esports and what they're all about.
Sure. So esports, I would say, maybe that's the right term, maybe it's the wrong term, but I consider it more competitive video gaming because there's video games that go all over the place, from single player games that you play by yourself to games you play versus a computer. But competitive video gaming typically is playing versus another player on some part of the world. And it's very similar to a lot of, you wouldn't believe how many similarities there are between other sports. It's about reaction time, it's about strategy, it's about predicting what the opponent's going to do so you can counter their strategy. And it's a lot of, very similar to a lot of other sports, but it allows a different group of people to be engaged with it.
So you just completed your first semester, we'll call it, here this fall. Tell us how that went.
It went all right. We are a very small university in comparison to the universities we were going up against. We played some giant schools, and, sometimes you have to lose gracefully instead of necessarily go for the win. We played our hearts out, but, we didn't have terribly high expectations when it comes to going against these giant universities with a lot of players. But we were able to pull out a win in Super Smash Brothers. We were able to, our Valorant game, I've never seen a series that close. Rocket League, our last game of the series, we outscored them if you combined all of our games, but we scored 5 goals in one game and then only scored 1 in another, and then they won a lot of the close games. So it was an incredibly close series for most of our games this year. We weren't quite able to pull out the amount of wins we wanted to, but I was proud of the guys for pulling up that close, especially with the way COVID hit us. We were a very late start. We were a little bit on the ropes for how we wanted to compete, and I think this second semester we're going to be able to pull out a lot more wins.
So you threw out some names there: Rocket League, Smash Brothers. Tell us a little bit about how many games there are, how many different types of competitions there are, and then describe each of them a little bit.
Sure. So I'll go over our fall ones real quick, the ones we just finished up. So Rocket League is it's like a soccer, but with cars that can fly. So a lot more three-dimensional. There's a lot of aerial play in that game, of the ball being really far up in the air and then cars flying out to get them. But it plays very similar to soccer. 2 goals, a defender. It's a 3 versus 3 game. Then we had Valorant, which is a tactical shooter. If you know what CSGO is, Counter-Strike Global Offensive, very similar to that. It's a 5 versus 5 game where there's an attack and defense side, and it's the first to 13 rounds. So you go at each other and you try to eliminate the other team or plant the spike and have the spike go off in order to win a round on that. Then we have Super Smash Brothers Ultimate, which there's a 4 versus 4 team. It's crew battle rules. Now, most people don't know what crew battle rules. Even some people on the team, they'd never played crew battle before. But it's essentially each player on the team has 3 lives, and they go up, and it's a 1 versus 1 fighting game. And you go until your lives run out, and then the next person on your team comes in. And it's the first one to eliminate the other 4 teammates on the other team.
So you talked about how numbers on each specific team. How many do you have total on your team this year?
We have about 33. No, that's fluctuating. We're still recruiting for our spring sports. So I'm going to say probably at the end of the year we're going to be looking at 36, 37. I have some students I'm currently talking to that I'm hoping are going to be on the team, but we haven't quite got to that finalization stage yet.
So recruiting is something that's an important part of your role. And
yeah.
Recruiting both new students as well as on-campus students?
Yeah, we're looking at, we've got some goals for what we want to recruit, and we've got some tools to help us reach out to those players. And, over fall, over winter break, we plan on having a decent amount of students on campus, seeing what we have as a setup going on, and hopefully recruiting some of those for the following fall.
So how many students typically compete in how many competitions? Are they just focusing on one game, or are they playing multiple?
It depends on the person and it depends on the game. So for some games like CSGO, which I mentioned earlier, and Valorant, they're pretty similar games. They're both tactical 5 versus 5 shooters. A lot of the strategy from one game ends up being in the other game. So those games typically have a little bit of overlap on the people involved in them. But other games like Hearthstone is a completely different game than Valorant. So although one person can compete on both teams, typically it's a less overlap. And it really depends on, is it a fall sport and a spring sport? Do you have time to commit to both teams? Because I don't want somebody who's struggling to keep up with the amount of games they're in. So although some people might be interested in competing in 4, 5, 6 games because they just love esports, I like to get in there and, make sure that they're going to be able to focus on each one and give it the proper amount of time. Because it's not only unfair to them to, they're not going to compete their best, but to their teammates who, they're counting on them to put in the practice. So if they're too split between too many sports, they just don't have the time to commit.
So you mentioned that esports does fall under, it's very much like athletics. Yeah. It falls under the jurisdiction of athletics. And so that creates some compliance and eligibility requirements, as well as some different opportunities in terms of scholarships. So how has that worked as you've built this program?
Yeah, I think all other universities that have esports have all fallen under the athletics banner. It just makes a lot of sense. There's some differences, here and there, but for the most part, there's way more similarities than you would think, than there are differences. So with athletics, I've been able to work under Chris Emileski, and he's been a phenomenal help. I've done some coaching online for esports before, but I'm very new to this whole in-person having 30 people under me instead of 5. I was much more used to coaching a small team, so he's been a phenomenal help, helping me figure out, where scholarships should be awarded, figuring out criteria for scholarships, as well as helping for recruitment. When I was recruiting, I just looked for the best players when I was doing online coaching before. I didn't look at, okay, these are people we want as students, because I wasn't doing it for a university before. So there's a lot more consideration in that type of thing. So it's been very interesting working under athletics, and Chris has been a huge help when it comes to that.
So you mentioned that you played against some really big schools. Yep. Who are the schools that we compete against, and how is that determined?
So we are members of NACE. NACE is the National Association of Collegiate Esports, similar to the NCAA for other sports. But the difference is NACE isn't quite big enough to separate teams into divisions. So all campuses throughout all of the United States end up in the same pool. So we played against like Purdue, giant schools, We played against Concordia, bigger schools. But, I think if you compared our size to the teams we're playing, if we were playing similar sized schools, we would have won a lot of games this year. I was pretty proud because, you look at some of these schools and the amount of scholarship funding they had. I talked to some people who said, no, all of our students are on full rides. So it's like, well, they're probably pretty good if you can offer full ride scholarship to every one of your students. I talked to the Purdue coach, and they had mentioned they hadn't dropped a round yet. That's crazy. I've never, seen a competition dominated that way. But, they have set hours of practice a day. They're a little bit more hands-on, as in their students are expected a lot, when they show up to their university. And, we expect a lot from our students, but we also understand our students have other responsibilities. Some people have jobs that they have to finish up. School is still a big priority for us. We don't want somebody falling behind in a class because they're spending too much time practicing.
Right. So there's a special room where your team practices and competes. Tell us a little bit about the facilities that you have available to you.
Sure, yeah, we found a nice room in ST, Science and Technology, where we're able to get a little bit away from other classes. Esports, believe it or not, can be very loud at times. People get excitement going, some adrenaline going in especially close games. And we were able to get a little bit away from the rest of campus that way. But it is still close enough where students feel like it's not out of their way to walk to practice. We have a lot of students that travel a little bit of a distance, so it's nice that it's here on campus. We have pretty much best-of-the-line machines you can get, best-of-the-line monitors. We have high-quality keyboards and mice, but we do allow students to bring their own keyboards and mice in. Typically, you have a little bit of a feel for what you like, so if they have a keyboard and mouse at home that they really, really enjoy, they set ours aside and make sure to put it back when they're done. And we have top-of-the-line headsets, so we spared no expense when it comes to putting together a room that will help our athletes compete at the highest level.
That's good. So how did you get involved with gaming personally?
That's a good question for my parents. I mean, I've been playing video games since as much as I can really remember. I do remember my brothers at one point got an N64 gifted for Christmas, and Super Smash Brothers, the original. I remember sneaking that back downstairs when I was supposed to be asleep and playing with my brothers. Getting involved in competitively video games since as early as I can remember. I was probably 6 or 7 playing. I wasn't playing for money or playing, with people online, but I wanted to beat my brothers as much as possible. So and that grew over time. In 5th, 6th grade, I started to get more competitive games and explored, games that didn't have a competitive side, but also I do enjoy.
So you skipped right over Pong, like where I started.
Yeah, I skipped right over.
Up and down, that's all I had to know. So.
No, I joined with pretty complex games right away, and it was, a difficult learning curve for somebody that age to understand the mechanics behind the game. But I feel like you toss somebody in, you give them a couple hours, they figured out a lot. You don't need to know a lot going in. You just sit there and you mess around a little bit and you'll figure it out.
So now with your new role as a head coach, has that changed your perspective on the competition side of things?
Yes, it's made, although I do enjoy competition a lot, when I'm at home and I'm not playing, helping esports, I'm spending a lot less time competing myself and more time analyzing games. I've always enjoyed watching esports, live on twitch.tv is where most of them are held. I've watched, way too many hours of competitive games, trying to figure out their strategies and stuff. I find myself when I'm at home, I'm not competing as much myself anymore, but I'm just rewatching games. What did they do there to make that work? That shouldn't have worked. And then you watch the clip 10 times. Oh, this is the adjustment they made and things like that. And then I just play single player games when I have my own time because I don't want the stress of competition anymore. I'm stressed out all week with competitions, between practice and getting ready. You get home and you're just like, oh, I can't get that stressed out anymore.
So tell me a little bit more about Twitch.
Sure.
For those that are curious and want to maybe watch this, and obviously those that are really committed to it and follow it. Tell us a little bit more how people can watch this.
Sure. So twitch.tv is typically what's used for gamers to stream their content. Now it's becoming more Facebook. There's some on Facebook. There's some on YouTube. But Twitch has always been the home for esports. So a lot of people stream the content, tournaments that go on. Instead of it going out on TV, it goes out on twitch.tv and, they run ads. The big tournament organizers like ESL, IEM, they host all their tournaments on Twitch. So from there, you can tune in. There's typically casters going over the game. We've got our own Twitch account, SMSU Esports. So that's twitch.tv/SMSU Esports. Easy to follow. You can look at old videos. If you missed the game from last week, all you do is go there and you scroll through old videos and you'll find it. So it's a big platform for being able to host those tournaments without, needing to have it, you have to see it exactly on time. It's nice to be able to go back and rewatch some of those games. And that's why a lot of competition is scouting your opponent. So you're watching their videos too, just to see what they were doing. So there's a lot of interesting play between teams.
Lots of strategy behind all of this,
Yeah,
and you have to do your homework.
Every week watch their old. Not every university is as ahead as us at getting the games streamed out. Some of them don't stream their games, which actually gives them a little bit of an advantage. It's a lot harder to research an opponent when you can't watch their film, but you deal with it as you know. It's not a big deal. We like to switch up our strategies. Sometimes we'll do something one week and then we'll just completely change it, and then hopefully if they watch the film, they're expecting something and it doesn't happen ever. So
that's good.
Just an advantage and disadvantage that way.
We were talking earlier about kind of the correlation between some of your competitors and the majors they're pursuing.
Yep.
Tell me a little bit about that. You talked specifically about students that are interested in digital media.
Yeah, so we've got a lot of broadcast media students that are interested, and those people have been very, very interested in esports. As in, not only do they compete in the games that they're in, but when they're not competing, they're out there wanting to cast the games. If you've caught some of our streams, the people that are talking over the games, those are almost all broadcast media students who are just love esports. They'll sit there and talk about esports. I know a couple of them. Not only do they cast some games, play in a couple games, but they also have a podcast talking about esports. It's just nice to see. We also have a lot of computer science majors. Typically, computer science majors and broadcast media is where we've seen the most for major-wise for our students.
So Spencer, if a student's interested in esports here at SMSU, what's their best way to get a hold of you?
Email me, spencer.louwagie@smsu.edu is the best way. If there is a Discord out there, if you get invited, and if you know somebody on the esports team, they can add you to the Discord. I pay attention to my Discord messages. When I'm at home playing games myself, I'm still paying attention to my Discord messages. You can always send me something on there. But email's probably the easiest way to get a hold, and they'll get you invited to the Discord and get you added to that type of thing.
That's great. So one last question for you, Spencer. If you could tell a prospective student and their family why SMSU was the best place for them, what would it be?
I think we've got a good mix of both competition and feeling a bit like a family. A lot of our teams, they're friends now outside of being teammates. And, we prioritize the academic side of it. So you want your student, you want your kid, you want, as a student going to college, you want to be able to compete, but you really need to focus academically. I think we do a good balance of academic focus and athletic focus, which I know some other universities might focus more on one or the other, but I think we do a good job prioritizing the academic focus.
That's great. Hey, Spencer, thank you for coming on today. Really appreciate it and learned a lot.
Yeah, good to hear.
Well, coming up next week, November 16th through the 20th, it's International Education Week here at SMSU. During the week, international music will be played in the Student Center, and there will be global treats and trivia, and international cuisine will be served by our friends at Chartwell. So it'll be a fun week as we celebrate the many different international students that are part of our Mustang family. For more details on those events, be sure to check them out online at smsu.edu. Thank you again to Spencer Louwagie, our guest this week, for joining us. Tune in 2 weeks when Dr. George Taylor, Assistant Professor of Management, will be my guest here on Southwest Connections. Thanks for watching.